Emily sat on the edge of the cream-colored chaise in the sunlit nursery, her hand gently stroking her round, 7-month pregnant belly. The room was nearly complete. Soft pastel walls, a white crib dressed in lace-trimmed bedding, and a mobile of golden stars twirling slowly above. It was everything she had dreamed of since she was a little girl. And beside her, in their custom-built mansion nestled in the hills, lived the man she believed was the love of her life, Daniel Carter. Handsome, accomplished, and adored by their community, Daniel had built a reputation as a successful entrepreneur and devoted husband. Together, they were the couple others admired: glamorous parties, charity galas, and magazine feature-worthy vacations. On paper, they were perfection. But behind the French doors and curated Instagram smiles, small things had begun to unravel. Emily first noticed it when Daniel started coming home late. At first, it was the occasional business dinner or last-minute client meeting. He would kiss her on the forehead, offer a tight smile, and promise to make it up to her. She believed him. After all, she'd seen how hard he worked to build his company. She prided herself on being an understanding wife, the kind who supported her husband's ambitions. But as the weeks passed, the late nights grew more frequent. Sometimes he wouldn't come home until well past midnight. Other times, she'd wake up to find the guest room door slightly ajar, a faint trace of his cologne lingering, as though he had chosen not to sleep beside her at all. The phone calls became another red flag. He used to take calls openly, chatting with colleagues and clients in front of her. But now, he stepped into other rooms. The moment his phone buzzed, he'd glance at the screen, mutter something unintelligible, and excuse himself. Once, during dinner, his phone rang 3 times. When she glanced at the screen, she saw only a number with no name. He grabbed it quickly, turning his back to her, his voice low and sharp. "I told you not to call now," he whispered. When he returned to the table, he smiled as though nothing had happened. "Work crisis," he said with a shrug. She wanted to believe him. And then there were his mood swings. Daniel had always been composed, a man who prided himself on his self-control. But recently, he had become irritable and short-tempered. He snapped at trivial things: a misplaced remote, a cold cup of coffee, the sound of her laughter while watching old sitcoms. "Do you have to be so loud?" he once barked. Emily froze, the remote still in her hand, her smile fading. Still, she convinced herself that pregnancy had made her overly sensitive. Hormones, she reminded herself. And Daniel was under pressure. The company was expanding, the baby was on the way, and life was simply busy. She told herself all marriages went through phases. That it was a temporary storm, and soon, the calm would return. But every night, as she lay in bed alone, her hands cradling her belly, she felt a growing ache in her chest. A quiet voice inside her whispered that something was wrong, deeply wrong. And no matter how much she tried to silence it, the doubt lingered like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Emily sat across from Tara at their favorite garden cafe, sipping on a warm chamomile tea as sunlight filtered through the trees. Tara, her lifelong best friend and brutally honest confidant, twirled a straw in her smoothie, her brows furrowed with hesitation. Emily sensed something was off. Tara had been unusually quiet, barely reacting to the nursery photos Emily had proudly shared from her phone. "You're holding something back," Emily said gently, resting her hand over Tara's. "Just say it." Tara glanced around, lowering her voice. "I wasn't going to, but I think you should know. I saw Daniel last week. At La Mer." Emily blinked. "That French place uptown?" Tara nodded. "Yeah. I was there with James, and Daniel walked in with a woman. Not a colleague. They were close. Sitting across from each other, heads low, laughing. She touched his hand at one point. It didn't look like business, Em." Emily let out a breathy laugh, forcing a smile. "Tara, come on. He works with so many people. Maybe it was a client." Tara looked at her, unmoving. It didn't feel that way. And the way he looked at her, it wasn't professional. Emily's heart squeezed, but she held her ground. "Daniel loves me. We're about to have a baby. He wouldn't." "I hope I'm wrong," Tara said quickly, squeezing Emily's hand. I just didn't want to keep it from you. That night, Emily tried to shrug off the conversation. She told herself Tara had misunderstood. That it was just a friend, a colleague, someone Daniel had to entertain for work. But her sleep was restless. The words, "It didn't feel that way," looped endlessly in her mind. A few days later, while cleaning out the car to make space for the new baby seat, Emily discovered something strange wedged under the passenger seat. Her fingers wrapped around a delicate, golden bracelet. It was elegant, studded with tiny white stones, clearly expensive. But she had never seen it before. She turned it over in her hand, checking for initials or markings. Nothing. Just the smooth, cold metal. Her mind raced. Maybe it belonged to Tara? Or one of Daniel's female colleagues? Maybe he'd bought it as a gift for her and forgot it was in the car? But something about the bracelet felt out of place. Daniel wasn't the forgetful type, especially not with expensive gifts. She would have known if it was meant for her. The style wasn't even her taste. Her fingers tightened around the trinket, a slow, uneasy dread blooming in her chest. She wanted to call Daniel immediately, confront him, but something stopped her. Fear. If she asked and he lied, it would hurt. But if he told the truth? Instead, she tucked the bracelet into her drawer, hidden beneath her scarves. Her heart urged her to dig deeper, to start asking questions, but her love for Daniel clouded her better judgment. She wasn't ready, not yet, to face a truth that might destroy the life she had built. Sophie stood by the window of her downtown apartment, gently bouncing her newborn son in her arms as the early morning sun painted the skyline gold. Her tired eyes, shadowed from sleepless nights, still held a trace of sparkle as she watched the city slowly come to life. Despite the exhaustion, she felt a sense of pride, a quiet victory blooming in her chest. Her baby boy, Leo, was perfect. Tiny fingers, ocean blue eyes, and the softest tufts of dark hair. He was everything she had hoped for, the living proof of a love she believed was real. She looked at her phone for the third time that morning. No new messages. No missed calls. A pang of disappointment pulsed in her chest. Daniel had promised he'd come by that morning. He had said he wanted to see his son, hold him, bring him a gift. Yet again, he was nowhere to be seen. Sophie walked into the kitchen and carefully laid Leo in his bassinet, brushing a kiss over his forehead. She turned and opened the fridge. Half empty. She'd forgotten to grocery shop again. Daniel said he'd help her with expenses, but so far, it had only been words. She wasn't used to this, being alone, juggling diapers, bottles, and broken promises. When she had met Daniel a year ago, it felt like fate. He was polished, confident, and had the aura of a man who could make anything happen. Their connection had been instant, magnetic. Unlike the immature guys Sophie had dated before, Daniel made her feel like a queen. He took her to upscale restaurants, bought her designer scarves, whispered about a future where they'd build something together. She had fallen hard, and fast. He told her he was married, yes, but unhappily. That his wife was cold, distant, and obsessed with status. He said the marriage was ending, that the paperwork was already in process. He only needed time. Sophie had believed him. When she got pregnant, Daniel didn't flinch. He told her he was happy. He kissed her belly and called their child, "our little miracle." But everything changed once Leo was born. Daniel's visits became sporadic, short, and always wrapped in excuses, work emergencies, travel, stress. He hadn't even told his family yet. Soon, he would say. Just give me a little more time. But Sophie was running out of patience. She picked up her phone and dialed him. Straight to voicemail. She gritted her teeth and typed out a message. You said you'd be here this morning. Leo needs his father. I can't keep doing this alone, Daniel. You said you loved us. When will we be more than a secret? She stared at the text, hovering over send, then hit it with trembling fingers. Part of her still believed in Daniel. He had looked at her with love once. She knew it wasn't imagined. But lately, a seed of doubt had begun to grow. What if he wasn't planning to leave his wife at all? What if she and Leo were just collateral damage in a double life? She reached down and picked up Leo, who had started to fuss. She rocked him gently and whispered, "It's okay, baby. Daddy loves us. He'll come around." But even as she said the words aloud, a sharp loneliness crept in, the kind that comes when hope is running out and truth begins to knock on the door. Emily stood in the bedroom doorway, the golden bracelet dangling from her fingers like a question she no longer wanted to ask. Daniel was seated on the edge of the bed, scrolling through emails on his tablet, his expression calm, unreadable. She waited for him to look up, her heart thudding against her ribs. "Daniel," she said, her voice steady but low. "I found this in your car. Under the seat." He glanced at the bracelet, barely missing a beat. "Oh," he said casually, setting his tablet aside. "That. I actually bought it for you. For your birthday." Emily blinked. "My birthday isn't for another 2 months." He smiled, getting up and walking over to her. I know. But I saw it, thought of you, and I wanted to hide it somewhere you wouldn't look. Guess I forgot about it." He chuckled softly, taking it from her hand and brushing a kiss against her temple. "You caught me being romantic for once." His words were smooth, his tone easy, but something in his eyes didn't quite match. Still, Emily found herself nodding. Maybe he had been trying to surprise her. Maybe Tara was just mistaken. Maybe the long nights and secretive calls really were just stress and work. She smiled faintly, feeling foolish for bringing it up. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've just been so emotional lately." Daniel wrapped his arms around her. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You're carrying our baby, Em. I want to make this special for you. Let me do that, okay?" For the rest of the evening, he was more attentive than usual. He ordered her favorite dinner, rubbed her feet while they watched TV, and even kissed her belly before bed. For a fleeting moment, the dark thoughts drifted away, and she allowed herself to believe in the life they had built. But exactly a week later, the illusion shattered again. The mail had been stacked on the entryway table when she returned from her prenatal yoga class. Between bills and a baby magazine subscription was a crisp white envelope addressed to Daniel. She would have set it aside, but her name had been mistakenly added to the label. Daniel Carter and Emily Carter. Curious, she opened it, and froze. It was a hospital bill. A recent one. For maternity care services at Rosewood Medical Center. The charges included prenatal visits, ultrasound imaging, and postpartum care. But Emily had never been to Rosewood. Her entire pregnancy had been managed at Memorial Heights, across town. She stared at the details, confusion slowly morphing into dread. And then she saw it. Patient name, Sophie Reynolds. Her hands began to shake. Daniel's name was listed as the guarantor, the one responsible for the charges. Emily sat down slowly on the staircase, the envelope still clutched in her hand. The bracelet. Tara's warning. The late nights. The calls. And now this. Her world was no longer tilting, it was cracking beneath her feet. Emily waited until after dinner, her hands trembling as she cleared the table. Daniel had been in a good mood all evening, telling her about a new investor meeting and praising her for how beautifully she had arranged the nursery. It felt like any other night, if not for the folded hospital bill burning a hole in her pocket. She followed him into the living room, where he was settling onto the couch with his laptop. She stood silently for a moment, steadying her breath, before stepping forward and placing the envelope on the coffee table in front of him. He glanced at it, then up at her. "What's this?" Emily folded her arms. "Open it." Daniel's expression barely shifted as he unfolded the paper. But as his eyes scanned the words, a flicker of something crossed his face. Too fast to read. "I found it in the mail," she said softly. "Your name is listed as the responsible party. But I've never been to Rosewood Medical. Ever." Daniel gave a short laugh, tossing the bill aside as if it were some trivial mix-up. "Seriously, Em? You're getting worked up over this. It's for maternity care. And the patient's name is Sophie Reynolds, she said, her voice cracking. Who is she, Daniel? He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You've got to be kidding me. Her heart pounded. Tell me the truth. There is no truth, he snapped, his tone rising. It's clearly a mistake. Insurance mix-up. Do you have any idea how many people I deal with in business? How many documents cross my desk with my name on them? Then why is it for maternity care? She shot back, tears rising in her eyes. Why is there a woman listed who isn't me? Why is she having a baby with your name tied to her bills? Daniel's face twisted in frustration. You're being paranoid, Emily. Hormonal. You've been acting like this for weeks. It's exhausting. Do you even hear yourself? I'm asking you a question, she said, her voice shaking. Are you cheating on me? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You need to stop. Right now. Before you ruin everything. I'm not ruining anything, she said through clenched teeth. I'm trying to understand what's happening to our life. And you're not giving me any answers. Daniel scoffed. You know what? If this is what I have to deal with every night, accusations, drama, maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe you need time to calm down and think. Emily stared at him in disbelief. So now you're threatening to leave? He said nothing. Just turned away and picked up his laptop, heading for the stairs. The silence left behind was louder than any shouting match could have been. Tears welled in her eyes as she grabbed her purse and keys. She couldn't breathe inside that house anymore. The walls felt too close, the lies too thick. She drove without thinking, her vision blurred by tears until she pulled into Tara's driveway. Tara opened the door and saw her friend's red, swollen eyes. Oh my God, Em. What happened? Emily stepped inside, collapsing onto the couch and shoving the bill into Tara's hands. He denied everything. Said I'm hormonal. Accused me of imagining it all. Tara looked at the paper, her expression hardening. He's cornered, that's why. He's panicking. I don't know what to do, Emily whispered. I feel like I'm going crazy. No, you're not, Tara said firmly. He is. And we're going to get proof. The kind he can't argue with. Emily looked up. How? Get a DNA test, Tara said. You said the woman's name is Sophie, right? If she has a baby, and if it's his, then that test will expose him. No lies. No gaslighting. Just truth. Emily nodded slowly, her face pale, her resolve building through the pain. If Daniel wouldn't confess, then science would. Sophie paced the floor of her apartment, her arms aching as she held Leo, who had just drifted to sleep against her shoulder. The baby's tiny breaths tickled her neck, a warm reminder of the little life she was now responsible for completely on her own. The love she had for her son was all-consuming, but the bitterness of abandonment clung to her like a second skin. It had been over a week since Daniel last visited, and her calls had mostly gone unanswered. Every time she looked at Leo, she saw pieces of Daniel, the curve of his lips, the same sharp brow, even the dimple in his left cheek. There was no doubt the baby was his. And yet, Daniel treated them like a dirty secret. She had believed his promises for far too long. He said he was handling things, that he needed time, that divorces weren't easy. But every week it was a new excuse, a new delay. Sophie wasn't stupid, she had started connecting the dots. He was still with his wife. Still living a lie. That evening, Daniel finally showed up. He arrived just before sunset, wearing a baseball cap and dark sunglasses like some guilty celebrity trying to avoid the press. Sophie opened the door, jaw tight, arms crossed. She let him in without a word. Daniel looked around the room awkwardly before leaning down to gently touch Leo's head. He's getting big, he said quietly. Yeah. Babies tend to do that, Sophie replied coldly, stepping away. He sighed. Look, I can't stay long. I just came to see him, and, To remind you we talked about boundaries. I told you I need time. You promised you'd be patient. Sophie's eyes narrowed. I've been patient for months, Daniel. You said you'd leave her. You said we'd be a family. I'm working on it, he replied, voice sharp. These things aren't simple. Don't insult me, she snapped. You're still living with her. Still playing house while I raise your child alone. I deserve better. He deserves better. Daniel's jaw clenched. You don't understand what's at stake. If Emily finds out. She will find out, Sophie interrupted. Because I'm going to tell her. He looked stunned. You what? I've had enough, she said, tears rising in her voice. Leo deserves a father who doesn't hide him. A mother who isn't lied to. And your wife deserves the truth, whether you give it or not. Daniel stepped forward, lowering his voice dangerously. You don't want to do this, Sophie. No, you don't want me to, she fired back. But I'm done protecting your secrets. Either you tell her, or I will. She stood tall, cradling her son as if daring Daniel to challenge her. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. Sophie locked the door behind him, her heart pounding. For the first time in weeks, she felt clear. If Daniel wouldn't choose them, she would force him into the light. The days of being hidden in the shadows were over. Emily sat silently in her car, parked across the street from a modest apartment building in a quieter part of the city. Her heart pounded in her chest as she watched the entrance, hands clenched tightly on the steering wheel. The private investigator she had hired, a discreet but determined man named Carter, had tracked Sophie down within 3 days. He confirmed everything. Sophie Reynolds lived there. She had given birth recently. And Daniel had been seen entering and leaving the apartment more than once. Always at odd hours, always looking over his shoulder. At first, Emily couldn't bring herself to act. She had sat with the information, crying alone in the nursery where the mobile of golden stars spun gently in the quiet air. She wanted to scream, to confront Daniel, to tear apart every memory they had built together. But she didn't. Instead, she waited. Watched. And then, she made her move. Carter had given her the exact time Sophie usually took out the trash, around 9 p.m., every third day. That Thursday night, Emily followed the routine. She waited, parked a few blocks away, hood up, her heart racing. Sophie emerged right on time, holding a small trash bag in one hand and a bundled baby carrier in the other. Emily sank lower into her seat as the woman passed, oblivious. Once Sophie went back inside, Emily made her way to the dumpster. Her hands trembled as she picked through the bag until she found what she needed, a used diaper, freshly tied, small and unmistakably from a newborn. Her stomach churned as she wrapped it in a clean plastic bag and rushed back to her car. The next step was the toothbrush. Daniel kept a backup one in the downstairs bathroom, the one he used after late nights when he didn't want to disturb her upstairs. She retrieved it the following morning, making sure not to touch the bristles, and sealed it in a separate container. Then she mailed both items to a discreet DNA testing facility recommended by Carter. The woman on the phone was kind, understanding, and didn't ask too many questions. The results would take 5 days. Those were the longest 5 days of Emily's life. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. She kept running scenarios in her mind, hoping somehow this would all turn out to be a mistake. Maybe the baby wasn't Daniel's. Maybe Sophie had lied to someone else. Maybe. The email came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She sat at her laptop, hands trembling as she clicked open the results. Paternity test result. 99.9% probability. Daniel was the father. Emily stared at the screen for a long time, unable to breathe. Her vision blurred, the sounds of the world dimming around her. Every moment of their marriage, every "I love you," every plan for the future, flashed before her like shards of broken glass. She shut the laptop, sat very still, and then she wiped her face. She would not scream. She would not beg. She would not give him the satisfaction of watching her crumble. No. If he had played her for a fool, then she would make sure the truth broke him in front of everyone who ever believed in their perfect life. She began to plan. Not just a confrontation. Not a dramatic shouting match. Something public. Something unforgettable. The kind of truth that didn't just shatter a man's lies, it exposed his entire soul. The evening was radiant, glittering with soft candlelight and the gentle hum of clinking glasses and cheerful conversation. Emily had gone all out for Daniel's birthday, just like every year. The long mahogany dining table was draped in white linen, adorned with golden cutlery, fresh white roses, and flickering candles. Laughter floated through the grand dining room of their home as guests toasted Daniel, clients, colleagues, family, and a few close friends. Daniel looked in his element, glowing with charm as he moved from seat to seat, shaking hands and receiving compliments. To anyone watching, it was a celebration of a man adored by all. To Emily, it was the final performance before the curtain dropped. She had rehearsed her words in her head countless times, checked the contents of the envelope more than once, and coordinated the precise timing of what would follow. Everything had to be perfect, measured, calm, controlled. Because this moment wasn't just about exposing Daniel. It was about reclaiming her voice. Halfway through the main course, as servers refilled wine glasses and the atmosphere buzzed with contentment, Emily stood slowly. The clinking faded, and all heads turned toward her. She smiled warmly at Daniel, who was seated beside her, dabbing the corner of his mouth with a linen napkin. "I just wanted to take a moment," she began, her voice smooth and clear, "to honor my husband on his special day." Applause broke out, and Daniel chuckled modestly, placing a hand over his heart. Emily held up her hand gently. "But instead of a toast, I thought I'd give you something more meaningful." She reached behind her and picked up the envelope she had placed carefully on a silver platter earlier. With grace, she laid it in front of him. Daniel raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Is this a surprise gift?" "In a way, yes," Emily replied. He opened the envelope casually. As his eyes scanned the page inside, the smirk faded. His face drained of color. His fingers trembled slightly as he lowered the paper and glanced at Emily, searching for words. But she wasn't finished. "I took the liberty of having a DNA test done," she said, addressing the entire room now. 2 samples. One from Daniel's toothbrush. One from the diaper of a baby boy named Leo Reynolds. A stunned silence washed over the room. The results show a 99.9% match. Daniel Carter is the biological father of that child. Gasps echoed around the table. Some guests looked at each other in confusion, others covered their mouths in shock. Daniel stood abruptly. "Emily, what is this? Some kind of sick joke?" "Oh, I wish it were," Emily said, her tone cool. "But you see, lies can only stretch so far before the truth snaps them in half." And right on cue, the double doors of the dining room creaked open. Heads turned as Sophie stepped in, her posture straight, her chin lifted, and baby Leo nestled in her arms. She wore a simple black dress and no makeup, but she didn't need it. The truth she carried in her arms was louder than anything words could say. More gasps erupted as guests turned toward Daniel. His face went blank. He stared at Sophie, then at the baby, then at Emily, trapped in the center of a life he had built on deceit. Sophie walked over to Emily and gave her a brief nod. Emily returned it with quiet strength, then turned back to the room. "To everyone who asked how we were the perfect couple," she said, "now you know the truth." She placed her napkin on the table, turned her back to Daniel, and walked away as the room remained frozen in stunned disbelief. Daniel was left standing, the test report in his hand, his double life unraveled in front of everyone who once admired him. The morning after the dinner party, the once pristine halls of Daniel and Emily's home felt hollow, the echoes of exposed secrets still hanging in the air. Daniel had not slept. He sat slumped at the edge of their bed, his head buried in his hands, the DNA report crumpled on the floor nearby. When Emily finally entered the room, dressed and composed, her hospital bag resting beside the door, he stood up abruptly, eyes rimmed red. "Emily, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. She didn't respond, just stared at him, her face unreadable. I never meant to hurt you, he said. It was a mistake. A stupid, horrible mistake. I lost control. I didn't think it would go this far. Emily let out a breath, shaky but firm. You didn't think at all, Daniel. You didn't think when you lied to me. When you visited her. When you touched her. When you got her pregnant. That wasn't just one mistake. That was a pattern. That was a choice. He stepped toward her, desperation etched across his face. But I love you. I love our baby. Please don't take her away from me. Behind him, Sophie's voice echoed from the hallway, firm and bitter. You said the same things to me. That you loved me. That you were leaving her. That we'd be a family. Daniel spun around, stunned to see Sophie there, Leo in her arms. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with betrayal. I didn't know you were still married, she continued. You told me she was out of the picture. You lied to both of us, Daniel. I believed you. I let you into my life. Into Leo's life. Emily's throat tightened. She looked at Sophie, then at the baby in her arms, her daughter's half-brother. Innocent. Born from deceit. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held her ground. I don't hate you, Sophie. I understand now. You were just another woman clinging to the same lie I was. That Daniel was a good man. Daniel moved to speak again, but Emily held up her hand. Don't, she said softly. This is no longer about you. It's about my child. And I will never let her grow up watching her mother tolerate betrayal, pretend everything is okay, and silently suffer for the sake of appearances. That ends now. She turned toward the door, her voice steady despite the storm inside. You lost your wife. You lost your family. And soon, you'll lose everything else. In the days that followed, Daniel's downfall was swift. News of the scandal spread like wildfire after Sophie posted the truth on her social media. Photos, messages, even a copy of the DNA report. The story caught fire. His company's board launched an internal ethics review. Investors pulled out. A once beloved public figure became a cautionary tale. Emily didn't look back. She moved in with Tara, started legal proceedings, and focused on her health and her baby. Her heart was broken, yes. But her spirit had survived. And that, she realized, was the first step toward freedom. The morning Emily went into labor was peaceful, the sky painted in gentle shades of lavender and gold. She had been staying in a cozy apartment near the city park, far from the sterile coldness of the house she once shared with Daniel. Tara was with her in the delivery room, holding her hand through every contraction, whispering strength into her ear as pain and purpose wove together. After hours of labor, Emily finally heard the cry that changed everything, a soft, high-pitched wail that sounded like hope. Her daughter was perfect. Tiny fingers. Rosebud lips. A shock of dark hair. When the nurse placed her on Emily's chest, a flood of tears spilled down her cheeks. In that moment, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the months of silence and grief all faded into the background. Nothing else mattered except the weight of her daughter in her arms and the steady beat of their shared future. She named her Grace. Emily returned home with more than a baby. She came back with purpose. She had learned the hard way how isolating betrayal could be, how quickly people turned their backs or silenced the truth to avoid discomfort. So she built something from her pain, the Grace Foundation, named after her daughter. It was a safe haven for women who had been lied to, abandoned, or emotionally destroyed by partners who thought they'd never be caught. With Tara at her side helping run operations and Sophie stepping in to share her own story, the foundation quickly grew from a local support group to a national platform. Sophie, having healed in her own right, found solace in advocacy. She worked closely with single mothers navigating similar betrayals, her voice steady and clear as she fought for justice and resources. Together, they gave women more than sympathy, they gave them power. In one of her first public appearances since the scandal, Emily was invited for a televised interview. She sat across from a respected journalist, poised, elegant in a soft blue blouse, with Grace asleep in a bassinet nearby. You had it all, the interviewer began. A husband, wealth, status, and then everything collapsed. Yet here you are, stronger, fiercer. What do you say to the people watching who are still in the thick of their own heartbreak? Emily paused for a long moment. The cameras rolled. The room held its breath. Then she smiled, not with bitterness, but with quiet strength. The DNA test broke my marriage, she said. But it saved my soul. The clip went viral. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was true. That night, after Grace had been fed and tucked into bed, Emily stood by the window, looking out over the twinkling lights of the city. Tara was making tea in the kitchen. Sophie was typing furiously at her laptop, drafting a speech for an upcoming fundraiser. Emily felt peace, not because life was perfect, but because she was whole again. And this time, she didn't need anyone's permission to shine.